She didn't ask for permission. She didn't beg for a roster spot. She didn't make a phone call to beg for someone's attention. And that, right there, is what makes this story different from every other basketball redemption arc you've ever heard. Caitlin Clark walked into the history books not because the establishment opened the door for her, but because she built her own. Here's what nobody tells you. The most powerful moment in Caitlin Clark's career didn't happen on a court. It didn't happen under the lights of March Madness. It didn't happen during any of the record-breaking nights that had entire arenas on their feet. It happened in a silence that came from a phone that never rang, a coach who never called, a program that looked at the most electrifying player in women's basketball history and said quietly that she wasn't their type. And that coach, his name is Geno Auriemma. And what happened next changed women's basketball forever. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand how Caitlin Clark shut down the most legendary coach in women's college basketball, you have to understand what he did first. Geno Auriemma built UConn into a dynasty that no program in the sport could touch. 20 national championships. A factory for WNBA stars. A recruiting pipeline so dominant that the best players in the country didn't just want to go to UConn, they felt like they needed to. Diana Taurasi, Maya Moore, Breanna Stewart. The names alone are enough to make any young hooper's heart race. So when a once-in-a-generation talent from Des Moines, Iowa started lighting up AAU circuits with a range, a vision, and a fearlessness that scouts hadn't seen in years, you'd think Geno's phone would have been the first one she heard from. It wasn't. Not even close. And the reason why? That's where the story gets uncomfortable. That's where the real drama begins. Because what Geno did, and more importantly what he said afterward, set the stage for one of the most stunning power shifts in the history of women's sports. Stay with me. Because the ripple effects of that single missed phone call are still being felt today. And by the time this story is done, you'll understand why one man's arrogance became one woman's rocket fuel. Every dynasty has a blind spot. And Geno Auriemma's blind spot had a name. Caitlin Clark wasn't a secret. She wasn't some hidden gem buried in a mid-major high school circuit that the big programs missed. She was the most talked about recruit in women's basketball, a 6-foot guard from Dowling Catholic High School who was dropping 30-point games with the casual confidence of someone who'd already been doing this for decades. By her junior year, she had already attracted attention from dozens of programs. Iowa was in. Louisville was circling. South Carolina was interested. And yes, UConn made contact. But here's where you need to pay close attention. Because the way Geno's program approached Caitlin Clark told you everything about how they saw her. There was no personal call from Geno himself. No visit. No sit down with her parents. What came instead was a light tap through her AAU coach. A casual check-in. The kind of outreach that says, "We're aware of you," not "we need you." Clark noticed. Her family noticed. And the message was received exactly as it was sent. You are not our priority. Meanwhile, Geno had made his decision. He was going all in on Paige Bueckers, a spectacular talent, no question, and had decided that taking both Clark and Bueckers in the same class didn't fit his vision. 2 elite point guards, same year, same roster. He chose one and moved on. And then, this is the part that lit the fuse, Geno said something in public that Clark would never forget. When asked later about missing out on the greatest player of her generation, Geno's response was breathtaking in its arrogance. He suggested that if Caitlin Clark had really wanted to come to UConn, she should have called him. She should have called him. Read that again. The most accomplished recruiter in the history of women's college basketball, a man who has built his entire legacy on identifying and pursuing elite talent, looked at a generational player and said, essentially, the burden was on her. Not on him. Not on his staff. On a teenager from Iowa who was supposed to chase down the king. That statement didn't just reveal a missed recruitment. It revealed a mindset. A comfort that had calcified into something dangerously close to entitlement. And Caitlin Clark heard every word of it. What she did next wasn't revenge. It was something far more powerful than revenge. It was proof. When Caitlin Clark committed to Iowa, the basketball world shrugged. Not because Iowa was a bad program. Lisa Blutter had built something real in Iowa City, a consistent, competitive Big Ten program with solid coaching and a genuine culture. But Iowa wasn't UConn. Iowa wasn't South Carolina. Iowa wasn't the kind of program people pointed to when they talked about where the next transcendent player would build her legacy. That was the conventional wisdom. And Caitlin Clark was about to make conventional wisdom look ridiculous. From the moment she stepped onto the Carver Hawkeye Arena floor, it was clear this wasn't going to be a normal college career. Not because of hype, but because of what actually happened when she played. The range was real. The court vision was real. The fearlessness was the most real thing of all. Clark didn't play like someone trying to prove she belonged. She played like someone who already knew she was the best player on the floor and was simply going about her business. The step-back threes from 30 feet. The behind-the-back passes in transition. The ice-cold clutch performances when games were on the line. Iowa had never seen anything like it. Women's basketball had never seen anything like it. And as Clark's numbers climbed, and kept climbing, something interesting started happening. People who had never watched a women's basketball game before started watching. Not because they were told to. Not because of a marketing campaign. Because of her. Ratings ticked upward. Arenas that used to echo started filling. Travel schedules started looking like Iowa was playing road games in hostile NBA arenas, because in some very real ways they were. Clark had become bigger than her program, bigger than her conference, and she was doing it in a place that Geno Auriemma had looked right past. Season after season, the trajectory only steepened. By the time her junior year rolled around, Clark was already being talked about as the best college women's basketball player alive. By her senior year, it wasn't even a conversation anymore. She wasn't just the best player in Iowa history. She was rewriting the record books for the entire sport. And somewhere in a championship office in Storrs, Connecticut, a legendary coach was watching. And maybe, just maybe, wondering what would have happened if he'd made one different phone call. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because what happened when Clark reached the professional level? That's where things got truly extraordinary. Numbers can lie. Statistics can be inflated by weak competition, friendly systems, and favorable circumstances. Every basketball fan knows this. So when Caitlin Clark's scoring numbers started climbing toward records that had stood for decades, the natural response from skeptics was, wait and see. They waited. And what they saw silenced every doubt. By her senior season at Iowa, Caitlin Clark had become the all-time leading scorer in NCAA Division I basketball history. Not women's basketball history. All of college basketball. Men and women combined. Let that land for a moment. Pete Maravich's record, set in an era when freshmen couldn't even play varsity, when there was no three-point line, when Clark's style of basketball literally didn't exist yet, had stood for 54 years. 54 years of players, dynasties, and Hall of Famers, none of whom could touch it. Then Clark came along and didn't just break it. She ran past it. 3,951 points. A number that didn't just rewrite a record, it rewrote the narrative of what was possible. But here's what made those numbers mean even more than the digits themselves: the stage on which she produced them. Clark didn't pile up points against pushovers in a forgotten conference. She dominated in the Big Ten, one of the most competitive conferences in the country, in front of audiences that kept growing, on broadcasts that kept drawing more viewers, against defenses that were specifically designed to stop her. And they couldn't. The triple-doubles. The 40-point performances in Elite Eight games. The deep threes that had bench players on opposing teams shaking their heads in disbelief. This wasn't just great basketball. This was appointment television in a space that had never commanded that kind of attention before. Iowa's NCAA tournament runs became national events. The 2023 run. The 2024 championship game. Ratings that shattered records. Sold-out arenas from coast to coast. A ticket market that had prices that rivaled postseason NBA games. And through all of it, one name on one program that had passed on her, UConn, kept showing up in the brackets. Kept being in her path. And when those two names collided on the biggest stages, what happened had nothing to do with coincidence. It had everything to do with what was built from a silence, a slight, and an unshakable belief. But records only tell half the story. What Clark did to the culture of women's basketball, that's the part that even the numbers can't fully capture. Sports are built on rivalries. But not all rivalries are created equal. Some rivalries are about geography. Some are about championships. And some, the rarest kind, are about something deeper. Something personal. Something that stops being about wins and losses and starts being about who was right. Caitlin Clark versus UConn was that kind of rivalry. Every time Iowa and UConn appeared in the same bracket, it wasn't just a basketball game. It was a referendum. A live, nationally televised answer to a question that had been hanging in the air since the moment Geno Auriemma decided not to pick up the phone. The question, was he wrong? The 2023 NCAA Tournament Elite Eight answered that question in Clark's voice, with Clark scoring on Clark's terms. Iowa versus UConn. A game that had the entire women's basketball world watching. And Clark, the player Geno said should have called him first, put on a performance that made every second of that game feel like history in real time. She was unstoppable, relentless, calm in the way that only the truly elite are calm when the moment is biggest. Every bucket was a sentence in an argument she had been building since the day UConn's silence told her she wasn't wanted. Iowa won, and the world noticed. But here's what was more interesting than the scoreboard: the conversation that happened in the aftermath. Because Geno Auriemma, to his credit, a man who has never struggled to find words, was asked again about Clark, about the recruitment, about the choice, and his answer revealed something important. He doubled down. Even after watching what she had built, even after the records, even after the crowds, he maintained that his decision was sound, that having two elite point guards in the same class wasn't the right move for his program. Maybe he was right about the roster logic, but the framing, the suggestion that Clark should have pursued him, that never changed, that lingered. And Clark, for her part, never needed to say a word about it publicly. She let the court do the talking. She always did. Because the most powerful response to disrespect isn't noise, it's legacy. And Clark's legacy was only getting started. The WNBA was next. And what happened there would ignite a debate that went far beyond basketball. The 2024 WNBA Draft. Indiana Fever. Pick number 1. When Caitlin Clark's name was called, it wasn't just a career milestone. It was the opening shot of something that would transform professional women's basketball in ways nobody had fully anticipated, and that a few powerful people in the sport were not prepared to welcome. The Fever had been struggling. Years of rebuilding, thin rosters, and the kind of quiet mediocrity that keeps arenas half empty and broadcast deals modest. Then Clark arrived, and overnight the math changed completely. Ticket prices for Fever road games, not home games, road games, hit numbers that made people do double takes. Arenas that had comfortably housed WNBA games for years suddenly found themselves oversold. Broadcasts that had been niche started drawing cable numbers that rivaled playoff sports. National networks that had given women's basketball polite but limited coverage were suddenly scrambling to get more games on air. All of it traceable to one player. But with that kind of visibility comes friction. And the friction that surrounded Clark's rookie season was unlike anything the league had ever navigated before. On the court, she was exceptional, adapting to the professional game with the kind of composure and skill that made it clear she was not a novelty. Off the court, every game became a conversation that spilled out of basketball and into questions about race, media coverage, marketing, equity, and what the league was and who it was for. Veterans expressed frustration about the gap between Clark's coverage and theirs. Critics accused the media of overinflating her story. Defenders pointed to the arena attendance numbers and broadcast ratings as proof that the attention was warranted. The debate was loud, messy, and real. And through all of it, Clark kept playing, kept producing, kept drawing the crowds. She handled the noise with a maturity that surprised even her harshest critics. She didn't fan the flames. She didn't use her platform to attack. She showed up and played basketball. And the one moment, the one decision she made that perhaps more than any other defined her first professional chapter, came not with a statement or a press conference. It came with a choice about money, about timing, and about what she was willing to sacrifice to hold her ground. It was a decision that cost her over $1 million. And it may have been the smartest move she ever made. $1 million. That's not a rounding error. That's not a minor contract footnote. For most people, for most athletes, that's life-changing money. Generational money. The kind of number you don't walk away from without a very, very compelling reason. Caitlin Clark walked away from it. The details, when they emerged, were stunning, not for the amount involved, but for what the decision revealed about who Clark was and what she was building. In the middle of her first professional summer, a period when WNBA players traditionally pick up significant income through overseas contracts during the league's off-season, Clark made the choice to stay home. She declined the international opportunity. She stayed in the United States. She worked on her game, built her brand, rested her body, and prepared for what was coming. And in doing so, she forfeited the kind of overseas earnings that had been a standard part of elite WNBA player income for decades. The immediate reaction from parts of the basketball world was skepticism. Why would she leave that money on the table? What was the strategy? Was it a risk? But the answer, when you looked at the bigger picture, was almost elegant in its simplicity. Clark wasn't just a basketball player at this point. She was a cultural phenomenon. And cultural phenomena don't follow the same playbook as traditional athletes. They create their own playbooks. The time she used instead of playing overseas went into endorsement development, into deepening connections with the brands that were already lining up to work with her, and into the kind of focused preparation that would define her sophomore professional season. She was building something that dwarfed any overseas contract. Leverage. Real, undeniable, market-changing leverage. Because when you are the most marketed women's basketball player in history, when your jersey sales break records, when your games move markets, when your presence alone changes the economic calculus of every team you play against, you don't need to chase money. The money chases you. And here's where the Geno Auriemma thread weaves back in, sharper than ever. Because the man who once suggested Clark should have been the one calling him was now operating in a professional landscape that Clark had fundamentally altered. A landscape where the players who came from programs like Iowa, programs that the old guard had underestimated, were reshaping what women's basketball was worth. The silence from that recruiting office had created a hunger. The hunger had created a work ethic. The work ethic had created a legend. And the legend was only getting started. Geno Auriemma is not a villain. Let's be clear about that. He is one of the greatest coaches in the history of American sport, not just women's basketball, all of sport. What he built at UConn is without parallel. The championships, the players he developed, the way he elevated the standard for an entire program and then an entire conference and then an entire sport. His legacy is real and it is earned and it is extraordinary. But legacies are living things. They get examined from new angles as time moves. And in the era of Caitlin Clark, Geno Auriemma's legacy was being examined more critically than it had been in years. Not because he lost championships. UConn kept winning. Paige Bueckers developed into everything Geno had hoped. An elite talent, a program cornerstone, a player who delivered when it counted. But the recruitment conversation didn't go away. And it didn't go away because of what Clark kept doing. Every milestone she reached brought the story back into focus. Every record broken, every arena filled, every broadcast number shattered reopened the question. What were you thinking? And Geno, to his credit and also to his detriment, kept answering it. In interviews throughout Clark's college and early professional career, he returned to the same defense. The roster logic, the point guard depth, the timing. And every time he revisited it, the contrast became sharper. Because on the other side of his explanation was the undeniable reality of what Clark had become. He had looked at the future of the sport and decided she wasn't his kind of future. And the future turned out to be bigger than anything any single program, even his, could have imagined. There's something almost Shakespearean about it. The king who passed on the player who rewrote the kingdom's rules. Not out of malice, not out of stupidity, but out of the most human of miscalculations. The assumption that the world he knew was the world that would always be. Geno's world was one where UConn set the standards. Where the great players came to him. Where dominance was so consistent that the occasional misjudgment could be absorbed without consequence. That world didn't disappear because of Caitlin Clark. But it got a little smaller. A little less absolute. A little more contested. And the person who contested it most effectively never raised her voice about it once. She just kept playing. And somewhere in that contrast, the king's explanations versus the challenger's silence, was the truest measure of power. This is the part of the story that goes beyond basketball. Because what Caitlin Clark did, what the chain of events set in motion by one coach's phone that never rang actually produced, was a transformation in how an entire sport is perceived, valued, and consumed. Before Clark, women's basketball had passionate fans, dedicated coverage, and genuine stars. It was not a secret. It was not a minor sport existing in a vacuum. But it operated in a specific cultural lane, respected by those who sought it out, invisible to vast swaths of sports fans who had simply never been given a compelling reason to tune in. Clark changed the reason. Not by herself, not entirely. The WNBA had been building. Players like Aya Wilson and Breanna Stewart had been doing extraordinary things. The league was improving, the talent was deepening, and the infrastructure was growing. But what Clark did was provide the breakthrough moment of cultural visibility that allowed all of those improvements to matter to a larger audience. Suddenly, casual sports fans who had never voluntarily watched a WNBA game were setting reminders for Indiana Fever games. Suddenly, sports radio that had given women's basketball brief, polite mentions was running full debate segments. Suddenly, the tickets that had been available at face value were being scalped for multiples of their worth. That doesn't happen without a catalyst. And the catalyst, tracing back through every twist of this story, starts at the moment a legendary coach didn't make a phone call to a teenager in Iowa. Because if Clark had gone to UConn, if Geno had pursued her with the urgency she deserved, what happens? Maybe she still becomes the greatest scorer in college history. Maybe the records still fall. But does she become the cultural icon in the same way? Does the underdog narrative, The girl who wasn't wanted by the dynasty and built her own dynasty anyway, attach itself to her story with the same magnetic force? Maybe not. And maybe that's the most profound irony of all. Geno's disregard didn't diminish Clark. It defined her. The story of her rise needed an antagonist. Not an enemy, not a villain, just a force that said no when the world would later scream yes. That force was UConn's silence. And Clark built everything on the foundation of that silence. Women's basketball is different now. More watched. More valued. More present in the mainstream conversation of American sports. That shift has many architects, but one name is at the center of it. And that name belongs to the player a legendary coach said should have called him first. Every great sports story has a surface layer and a deeper one. The surface layer of this story is satisfying enough on its own. An elite player gets overlooked, proves the doubters wrong, breaks records, and changes a sport. Classic underdog arc, clean narrative. Easy to tell. But the deeper layer is where the real meaning lives. Because this story is not really about basketball. It's about what happens when institutions become so comfortable with their own power that they stop seeing what's right in front of them. It's about what happens when a single act of disregard, a phone call not made, a recruit not pursued, creates a chain of consequences that the person who made that choice could never have predicted or controlled. Geno Auriemma built one of the greatest dynasties in American sports history. That is true. It remains true. Nothing that Caitlin Clark did erased UConn's championships or diminished the players Geno developed or reduced the legacy of what was built in stores. That would be an absurd read of events. But it is also true that one of the most legendary figures in the sport looked at the game's next great player and miscalculated. Not catastrophically. Not out of cruelty. But in the specific, quiet, costly way that comes from operating for so long at the top of a hierarchy that you stop asking the question every great talent evaluator must always ask. What am I missing? What he missed was everything. And what Caitlin Clark did with the absence of his attention was build something that made his absence irrelevant. She didn't need his stage. She built a bigger one. That's the final word on this story. Not triumph over a villain. Not revenge against an enemy. But something more lasting and more instructive than either of those. It's the story of what quiet belief can do when the loud voices don't call. What determination produces when the door that was supposed to open stays shut. What legacy looks like when you stop waiting for permission and start building proof. The phone that never rang from stores, Connecticut became the silence that powered a revolution. One record at a time. One arena at a time. One broadcast number at a time. Until the sport that had been a niche became a phenomenon, and the player who wasn't wanted by the dynasty became the dynasty herself. Geno Auriemma built champions. Caitlin Clark built a movement. And in the end, in the long, complicated, beautiful end, that's the difference that will be remembered most. This was her story. Told on her terms. Built from scratch, from a silence, from a snub that history will never let the basketball world forget. And she never had to say a word about it. She just played.